You know, there ain't too many things harder in the world of college football than winning a national championship. But winning back-to-back national championships is one of those things. That is harder than winning a national championship. In today's video, Lustradamus is going to let you know if Ohio State has a chance to accomplish that feat back-to-back natties. It's time for another prediction video. Good morning. That's Uncle Lou here. That's right. It is me, Lustradamus, live on YouTube for you. Thanks for watching. It's time for another game by game prediction video. And up today, we are going to do the defending national champion, Ohio State Buckeyes. You guys know the deal. Hit the thumbs up if you hadn't already. Please subscribe to the channel if you're new here. I post these pointless, barely watchable college football videos almost every single day of the year. We do call-in shows 2 days a week or 2 nights a week. We live streams on the weekend. We have a really good time here. We've built a pretty good college football community around this channel. Click the subscribe button. Become a part of that community. You'll be glad you did. All right, we're going to talk about Ohio State today. Now, of course, they won the national title last year. There's not a whole lot to talk about. I mean, we can recap the season, but that's been done a million times. They went 10-2 with a loss to Oregon and Michigan, got hot, red hot in December and January, and ran through the playoffs. It was one of the most impressive 3 or 4 game streaks that I've seen a team go on in a long time, not just because of how good Ohio State looked, but against the competition they did it against, right? You're talking playoffs here, multiple top 10 teams. I mean, they beat, Oregon, they beat Texas, they beat Notre Dame. They just ran through the playoff. Tennessee, just a very impressive run for Ohio State to end the season. But like every team in the country, this is a new season. They've lost players off of last year's team. They've lost coaches. Ohio State recruits very, very well. So in a lot of cases, they've got players ready to step in and sort of fill the void. 2 new coordinators for Ohio State next year. Let's take a look at this year's Ohio State team and what it might look like. Of course, it starts with quarterback. That's what always gets the most attention, right? And it was an interesting situation, I think, for Ohio State last year when it came to the quarterback, in that it's not that I think Will Howard was a bad quarterback. He obviously wasn't a bad quarterback. I don't think you can win a natty with a bad quarterback. But he's probably the worst quarterback Ohio State's had in like 10 years. And that's not an insult to Will Howard. It's a compliment to the run of quarterbacks that Ohio State had, right? You talk about Justin Fields, C.J. Stroud. You can go back further than that. A lot of really, really high-level quarterbacks, but no national titles. They bring Will Howard in through the portal, and they win the natty. And if you look over the last 3 or 4 years, it's been kind of those types of quarterbacks that have been winning the natty. You're sort of mid-level quarterbacks, right? Will Howard, J.J. McCarthy, Stetson Bennett before that. Now, we did have a run in the late 2010s where you had some elite, just super high-end quarterbacks winning national titles, from Trevor Lawrence to Joe Burrow, Jalen Hurts and Tua sort of split a natty there in 2017, playing half the game each or whatever. But lately it's been more of the kind of, run-of-the-mill QBs surrounded by elite talent that have been able to guide their teams to the national championship. And that was the case for Ohio State last year. But Will Howard is gone. Julian Sayin, well, he actually is from the portal. He's from Alabama. Transferred to Ohio State from Alabama. Julian Sayin, so he'll be a first-year starter at quarterback. Not a lot of experience. In fact, very little experience at all for Julian Sayin. Now, very highly recruited out of high school, a lot of talent, high ceiling, a lot of potential, all of that. You don't become the starting quarterback at Ohio State if you don't have those things. But it's all question marks until you see a kid do it on Saturdays, right? At least with Will Howard, who you brought in from the portal, he had a lot of experience, Power 4 experience at Kansas State. So you had an idea of the type of play you were going to get from Will Howard. You don't really have that from Julian Sayin, at least not in game time situations. Now, obviously, the coaches have seen him in practice, and they're impressed enough with him to, I think, make him the starting quarterback. It hasn't officially been announced, but we all kind of know how this works. It's going to be Julian Sayin, right? They also have two brand new coordinators. So you start on the offensive side of the ball. Now, they brought Chip Kelly in to run the offense, and they won the Natty. Now Chip Kelly's gone, and they've kind of promoted Brian Hartline. Brian Hartline has made his name at Ohio State as a recruiter, really responsible for bringing in the seemingly never-ending string of elite first-round talent wide receivers that Ohio State seems to get their pick of every single year. As a wide receiver coach and sort of a top-level recruiter for Ohio State. He's been promoted to offensive coordinator. They have a new defensive coordinator as well, Jim Knowles, who I think is one of the best defensive coordinators on the planet, left and took the same job at Penn State. Kind of a weird situation there, a lateral move within the conference from Ohio State to Penn State. So we'll see what that means. They've brought in Matt Patricia, who I believe most recently was the head coach of the Detroit Lions before getting fired, showing his walking papers there. But a good defensive mind in Matt Patricia. But still, two brand new coordinators and a new quarterback could be a recipe for some growing pains for Ohio State. They do lose talent on both sides of the ball, particularly the defensive line, I think, could be a little bit of a concern, at least when it comes to depth for Ohio State this year. A wide receiver, of course, never an issue. Even though they lost Emeka Egbuka to the NFL, they've still got Jeremiah Smith, probably the best player in college football, definitely the best wide receiver. And they've got Carnell Tate on the other side, and, you know, a handful of other wide receivers that are destined to become household names at Ohio State. Let's just talk about the offense. Jeremiah Smith, of course, the sort of, is he the leader of the offense? It's kind of unusual for a wide receiver to be considered the leader of the offense. He's definitely the most talented playmaker they have, right? Broke a lot of Chris Carter's records last year at Ohio State as a true freshman, and definitely supplanted himself as one of the nation's just foremost weapons in all of college football. I mean, the guys, you can talk for an hour about Jeremiah Smith and it still wouldn't be enough. The guy's absolutely unbelievable. He could start in the NFL today. I don't know what else to say about him. New quarterback, though. We'll see what that means. Emeka Egbuka gone. Carnell Tate is back. They bring in a tight end through the transfer portal, Max Clare, who was at Purdue last year, had, I think, 700 or 800 yards receiving and double-digit touchdowns for Purdue. So you would think he would be in a better situation now at Ohio State. Purdue, of course, one of the worst teams on the planet last year. Julian Sayin does appear to be the quarterback ahead of Lincoln Kienholz, who's been at Ohio State for a while, but sort of keeps getting passed over. And we'll see how he can do compared to, say, Will Howard from last year. Now, he doesn't need to be Justin Fields or C.J. Stroud, but kind of these first-round talent, elite numbers, 4,500, 5,000-yard passing type of guys, right? We saw that last year. Ohio State is so talented everywhere. The quarterback really just needs to distribute the ball and run the offense efficiently. Don't turn the ball over. Don't blow it, right? Don't lose any games for Ohio State. And sort of your mid-level average quarterback can take Ohio State a long way, so we'll see if what happens. The running game could be a potential question mark for Ohio State, again, particularly early in the season. They're replacing both of their sort of 1A and 1B starting running backs last year. They had one of the best running back tandems in all of college football in Travion Henderson and Quinshon Judkins. They're both gone off to the NFL. So it's going to be some new names at the running back position here for Ohio State this year. James Peoples, I guess, has been sort of listed as the starter in spring, heading in now to summer camp and fall practice. The offensive line is going to have to replace a couple of high-level starters, although they do have the majority of the interior back on the offensive line. We'll see. Again, Ohio State recruits to the top 5 every single year. They portal well. They develop and coach their players up. I don't expect there to be some sort of obvious weakness on Ohio State. One thing you have to keep in mind when you're talking about teams like Ohio State. So, and what do we mean by, Ohio State, Georgia, Texas, Bama, Oregon, these teams that just recruit year after year after year after year within the top 5 or 6, right? Yes, they're going to lose a lot of talent every single year to the NFL. They're recruiting future NFL talent every single year. So every single year they're losing talent to the NFL. But because they recruit in the top 5, they're likely to replace those players with really, really good players. So it's sort of first world problems when you talk about teams like Ohio State having to replace high-level starters, because odds are they're going to be able to replace those starters with really good players. The sort of question mark, and I kind of draw a difference between, like, I have a concern about something or I have a question about something. I think it's fair to have a question about 2 new coordinators. new quarterback, replacing your top two running backs, replacing Abuka, replacing some all-world linebackers. I think it's fair to have questions about how will the new players play, particularly early in the year, compared to how those veteran sort of all-time greats were playing at the end of their career. I think it's fair to have that question. I'm not concerned about whether or not Ohio State has talented running backs. Of course they have talented running backs. Again, look at the way they recruit. Of course they've got talented offensive linemen waiting to start. Talented linebackers waiting to take the spot of the players who left from last year. Talented DB waiting to replace Denzel Burke. They've got all that. They've got Caleb Downs at safety. You want to talk about Jeremiah Smith being the best offensive player in football? Caleb Downs might be the best defensive player. They might have the two best players in football, the best offensive and the best defensive player. I mean, they're absolutely loaded. But a lot of it is going to be new. The biggest concerns for me, or again, concerns is the wrong word, I guess, here with Ohio State. The biggest question marks I have about Ohio State heading into the season are two new coordinators. How is that going to affect both the players that have been there and sort of learned the old system? Now, Brian Hartline has been at Ohio State for a while, so I doubt there's that much change to the offensive system, terminology, formations, plays, things like that. Defensively, though, we'll see. But how much is having two new coordinators going to impact both the players that have been there and the new players? A lot of times, a lot of instances. In fact, we saw this with Ohio State. When you replace a coordinator, it year two under that coordinator tends to be better or more smooth than year one. If you look at Jim Knowles, Ohio State's defense took a decent step forward first year under Jim Knowles. Second year under Jim Knowles, night and day difference from what they had prior to Jim Knowles. It was just one of the best defenses in the country, period, bar none. Will that be the case here? So I think it's fair to ask those questions about Ohio State while also acknowledging they're one of the most talented teams in the country. And we're going to look at the odds in a second. They've got great odds to win the Big Ten. They've got great odds to make the playoffs. They've got great odds to win the national title. And I agree with all that. They're one of 5, 6, 7 teams, that I think have a really good shot right now, sort of 6 weeks out from the start of the season of winning it all this year. Ohio State is on that short list of teams for me. But like all those other teams on that list, there are fair questions to ask about Ohio State heading into the season. I think you're being naive or short-sighted if you're an Ohio State fan and you go, well, we won the Natty last year. We recruit good. Ryan Day's still there. We're going to go 100-0 and win the national title again this year. You might win the national title again this year. You might not. We'll see. We're going to start to try to figure that out here when we get ready to go through the game-by-game prediction. You can see I've got it pulled up over here. We're going to go through it here in just a second. But let's talk about the odds here for Ohio State for next year. Now, how many games is Ohio State expected to win in the regular season? This is a regular season number, so doesn't account for a potential Big Ten championship game, bowl game, or playoffs. It's just 12-game regular season. How many games? How many games is Ohio State expected to win? 10.5. That's high. In fact, it's the highest in all of college football. Nobody else has a win total higher than 10.5. The highest you could have would be 11.5. Not that you can win 11.5 games or even 10.5, but this is a betting number, so people are betting over or under. So the highest you can have is 11.5. And if you think somebody's going 12-0, you would bet over that 11.5 number. The number for Ohio State is 10.5. For comparison's sake, there's not a single team in the SEC that has a win total at 10.5. There's 3 that have a win total at 9.5. I think it's Georgia, Bama, and Texas. But there's no teams in the SEC with even a 10.5 win total. So this is a very high sort of betting number, expected win total for Ohio State. What this is telling you is that the betting markets are expecting Ohio State to go either 11-1 or 10-2. And Ryan Day's been at Ohio State for 6 years now? Is that right? I think he's never lost more than 2 games in a regular season, and it would be surprising, honestly, if they did this year. But the expected win total for Ohio State, the betting number right now, sits at 10.5. What about the odds to win the Big Ten? Something they did not do last year, even though they did win the national title. Of course, you'll remember last year they lost to Oregon early in the year and then heartbreaking loss to Michigan at the end of the year. I only say heartbreaking because it's such a bitter rivalry, and they're on a bit of a losing streak now to Michigan, having lost. That was the 4th game in a row they've lost. They haven't beat Michigan since 2019. The game wasn't played in 2020, and Michigan has now beat them every single year, 21, 22, 23, and 24. So those were their 2 losses in the regular season, and that loss to Michigan knocked them out of the Big Ten title game. Oregon actually won the Big Ten last year, beating Penn State, but then Ohio State, after beating Tennessee at home in the first round of the playoffs, went into the Rose Bowl and just absolutely destroyed what I thought and still think is a really, really good Oregon team. I actually think Oregon, at the end of the year last year, was probably the second best team in the country. They got overwhelmed early in that game. I think Oregon could have beat Texas. I think Oregon could have beat Notre Dame. I think Oregon obviously did beat Penn State in the Big Ten championship game. Even beat Ohio State early in the year, but just got overwhelmed in that game there. Anyway, the odds to win the Big Ten, Ohio State is favored to win the Big Ten again. Now, they were favored to win the Big Ten last year and didn't even make the Big Ten championship game. And you all know, now in the age of the 12-team playoff, we have to approach the seasons differently in terms of how we view potential records, right? It used to be if a team was sort of projected to go 10-2, that was it. You weren't making the playoffs. You weren't winning a natty. I mean, it was just, that was it. You had either no playoff or a 2-game BCS or eventually a 4-team playoff. But, even in the 4-team playoff, it became hard to make the playoffs if you had more than one loss. But now, like we saw last year with Ohio State, you can afford a couple of losses during the season. And if you get hot at the right time at the end of the year, you can still win it all. So Ohio State favored to win the Big Ten again, odds sitting at plus 185. Penn State actually with the second best odds in the Big Ten at plus 240. Penn State and Ohio State, of course, play in the regular season this year. We'll talk about that in a second. Oregon right behind Penn State at plus 320, and then a significant drop after that. So those 3 teams are clearly the favorites in the Big Ten: Ohio State, Penn State, and Oregon. Oregon at plus 320. Massive drop off to the 4th place team, Michigan, at plus 1,000. So that's how the odds line up to win the Big Ten this year. What about Ohio State's chances at a national title? Again, at least according to the numbers in Vegas, the betting numbers, they've got the 3rd best odds to win the national title. So 3rd best odds to repeat as national champions for Ohio State. Texas actually has the best odds at plus 550. Right behind them is Georgia at plus 600. Actually tied with Ohio State. So I was wrong. Ohio State is not 3rd. They're tied for 2nd, I guess, with Georgia. Georgia and Ohio State both at plus 600. Just behind Texas at plus 550. Penn State after that at plus 750. Then a pretty good drop off to Alabama at plus 1,100, tied with Oregon at plus 1,100. So Ohio State right behind Texas, tied with Georgia, second best odds to win the national title. All right, it's time to go through the schedule. And I'm going to give you a winner and a loser for every single week. Now, before we start, my overall thoughts on Ohio State heading into the season, I kind of have already told you. One of the most talented teams in the country. I think Ryan Day is a top 5 coach without question. You can argue whether he's 2nd or 3rd. You sort of have the Kirby, Dabo, Ryan Day. To me, those are clearly the 3 best coaches in football, and I don't really care what order you put them in. If you're listed as one of the best 3 coaches in all of football, you're probably a pretty good coach, and that should be all that really matters, I think. But of course, people love to argue over things. So if y'all want to argue in the comments about whether Ryan Day is the 1st, 2nd, or 3rd best head coach in the country, go ahead. If you think he's not one of the top 3 head coaches in the country, then I think you just hate Ohio State. He's got the highest winning percentage in the history of college football. There's not a coach that's ever had a higher winning percentage than Ryan Day. And it's not like he's only been there for a year or 2. He's been there 5 or 6 years, so he's done it for an extended period of time. He's won Big Ten titles. He's won national titles. He's won New Year's 6 games, playoff games. Hell, he even managed to beat a couple of SEC teams last year, which is absolutely unheard of at Ohio State. Ohio State's record, of course, just completely abysmal against the SEC. Ryan Day beat 2 SEC teams last year in the postseason, Tennessee and Texas, which means Ryan Day almost has a 500 record against the SEC now. He sits at 2-3. Ryan Day does against the SEC. But anyway, he's one of the best coaches in all of football. There's no doubt and no question about it. They do lose a lot of talent on both sides of the ball, but they recruit well and they portal well. They lose 2 new coordinators. That is a little concerning to me. Not that I think the coordinators are bad, but you usually see coordinators, it takes until the 2nd year sometimes for the team to sort of totally get on board with new coordinator situations. So I think a little bit of a concern or a question there. Julian Sayin at quarterback, almost no experience at all. How's that going to work this year for Ohio State? We'll find out as the season goes along. All right. You don't get much time to sort of let Julian Sayin get his feet wet here. We have one of the biggest games of the year in all of college football here in week 1. when Ohio State hosts Texas. This is a massive game. Both of these teams are going to be ranked in the top 5 of every single preseason poll and ranking on earth. They're going to be number 1 and number 2 in a lot of polls and rankings, but top 5 in every single poll and ranking here. Played last year in the playoffs. Of course, Ohio State came out on top, beating Texas in a great game. Massive advantage for Ohio State here to have this thing at home for the obvious reason, your home crowd and all that. But with Julian Sayin having his first ever start, if he had to go on the road and at Texas, it's hard to imagine that going well for any starting quarterback, first start on the road at Texas. Now, Texas also has a new starting quarterback, kinda. It's Arch Manning. He's had some starts at Texas in the past, filling in for an injured Quinn Ewers. And even beyond that, he has played in a lot of games at Texas over the last couple of years. He's a 3-year guy that's now been at Texas for all 3 years, as opposed to Julian Sayin, who spent time at Alabama, then transferred, has no starts at all, and very little playing time or experience at all at either school. So even though technically Arch Manning is a first-year starting quarterback for Texas, I give the quarterback advantage in this game to Texas because Arch Manning does have some starting experience and a lot more overall experience than Julian Sayin, who's got next to none. Again, Julian Sayin may end up being a better quarterback than Arch Manning. I'm not saying he will or he won't. But in game 1, a game this massive here, where quarterback play could matter a lot, turnovers, nervousness, nerves, whatever the case, I lean Texas a little bit here in the QB matchup. Home field obviously goes to Ohio State. 2 new coordinators for Ohio State. Texas, like Ohio State, lost a lot of talent to the draft last year. That they recruit in the top 5 every year, so they're going to lose talent to the draft every year, but they backfill it really well. They portal really well. These might be the 2 most talented teams in college football. This is like the NIL Bowl here. Both of these 2 teams are spending enormous amounts of money on their roster. Nothing wrong with that. That's the way college football is set up today. But Ohio State, I think, had the highest paid roster last year. It looks like Texas is going to have the highest paid roster this year. It's just a massive game. Now, the good news for whoever loses this game is obviously because we're in the age of the 12-team playoff where conference winners get in no matter what. Texas could lose this game 100-0. Ohio State could lose this game 100-0. It really doesn't do anything to affect where these teams will end up at the end of the season outside of maybe some seeding type stuff. Let's say, for example, Texas and Ohio State, neither one win their conference, but they're both 10-2 at the end of the year. And you're trying to seed the playoffs, and Ohio State won this game by 2 touchdowns. Well, it would make sense to then give Ohio State a higher seed in the playoff than Texas, and maybe you would look back at this game as a reason to do that if you're the playoff committee. So it's not that this game has no meaning at all down the road. In fact, the opposite. It could have a lot of meaning down the road. It could be the difference between a home playoff game in week 1 and a road playoff game in week 1. But the loser is not out of it, is the point. I think this is going to be a low-scoring defensive game. Early in the season, defenses are usually a little further along than offenses, especially in the case of Ohio State, where you're breaking in new coordinators on both sides of the ball. I've already done a Texas version of this video that you're watching here, a prediction video. So if you've seen that, you already know where I'm headed, so there's no point in prolonging it any further. I think Texas goes on the road and gets the win in week 1. It's hard to repeat as national champions. It's hard to, who knows what's been going on at Ohio State over the last 6-7 months as far as preparation and how hard are they working this offseason compared to last offseason when they didn't yet have the Natty. There's just a lot that goes in. Look, either team could win this game. This is a coin flip thing. Would I be surprised if Ohio State wins this game? No, of course not. Not at all. If these 2 teams played 10 times, they'd probably go 5-5, or one team would win 6-4. One team would win 6 times, the other team would win 4. These are, we might see this game twice. This could be a preview of the national championship game. So I know Ohio State fans, and every fan base for that matter, wants to win every game, and I get it. I hope you're not too mad or upset that I'm picking Texas to win this game. Ohio State is clearly one of the best teams in the country, and I'd be absolutely shocked if they're not in the playoffs at the end of the year. And as you found out last year, that's all that really matters. Once you get in, you'd win it, just like you did last year. But I do have Ohio State starting 0-1. Grambling State will be an easy win, as will Ohio. The Bobcats there, Ohio State will roll over them, no problem. Then they have their first bye week before they go on the road to play Washington. Now, I do think this could be a tricky game here. I think Washington is going to be one of the most improved teams in the Big Ten in 2025. Last year, they were kind of a forgotten team. You know, they made the playoffs 2 seasons ago, and then everything just fell apart for them. DeBoer left to take the head coaching job at Alabama. You thought maybe Ryan Grubb would be promoted to head coach. Instead, he left to become a coordinator in the NFL. So they ended up with an all-new coaching staff. They lost 21 of their 22 starters from that playoff team to either the NFL draft, graduation, or the transfer portal. So last year, you had a whole new coaching staff, basically an entire new roster, or at least new starters, and a new schedule as part of the Big Ten. And it just didn't go well. I think they're set to have a rebound year in 2025. Now, I don't think they're winning 9 or 10 games and competing for the Big Ten or even making a playoff. But they play Ohio State. They play Oregon. They play a couple of other teams that are sort of positioned in the top half of the Big Ten. And I won't be surprised at all if Washington knocks off 1 or 2 of those teams. And this can be a tough place to play in Washington. It's an unfamiliar environment for Ohio State. They do have a bye week. And because they already have that loss to Texas, at least according to my prediction, I think Ohio State will not overlook this game, take it for granted, whatever you want to call it. I think Ohio State shows up ready to play and gets the win on the road in Washington. Come back home, play Minnesota. Was it Minnesota that almost beat Penn State late in the year last year, which really would have screwed a lot of things up? They're that type of team. They're not a great team. They don't recruit well. They don't have anywhere near the talent of Ohio State or Penn State for that matter. This is Ohio State's homecoming game. There's really no reason that Minnesota should be able to compete with Ohio State, particularly at home. Early in the year, you'd imagine probably pretty healthy at this point in the year. Ohio State should roll there against Minnesota. And then you play on the road at Illinois, and I think you lose to Illinois. Illinois is a lot like Michigan. They are a gritty line of scrimmage, sort of old school Big Ten team, kind of what you think about the Big Ten used to be, sort of when Keith Jackson was calling plays with the sort of the big uglies up front, or the hog mollies too. You can Google that. Brett Bielema is working on something there in Champaign, and Illinois feels like this year's Indiana to me. And to a lot of people, I think, not necessarily that they'll go 11-1 or whatever it is Indiana did last year, but it feels like they will be the Big Ten team sort of outside of the big names that could potentially make the playoffs, right? Everybody talks about Ohio State, Oregon, Penn State, even Michigan. And then you look up last year and Indiana's in the playoffs. And you're like, wait, what? Who's Curt Cignetti? It feels like Illinois could be that this year. Their quarterback is back. The coaching staff remains intact. And again, they are a tough physical team. I think Ohio State goes on the road there and loses. Maybe Julian Sayin makes a couple of mistakes, whatever it is. I think this is going to be a great game. This kind of reminds me of last year's Nebraska game for Ohio State, which, of course, they ended up winning. But they nearly lost that thing and probably should have lost it, but they found a way to win. I think this one gets away from them. I think they lose on the road at Illinois. They'll rebound the next week on the road against Wisconsin. Luke Fickell could be in trouble up there, and it doesn't make me happy to say that. I was high on Luke Fickell when he was at Cincinnati. I thought it was a great hire when Wisconsin brought him in, but he made some boneheaded decisions early on there, and he's been unable to recover. He inherited a program that basically averaged 9 and 10 wins a year in their sleep, and he can't get them above 7 wins. It's just not gone good there for Luke Fickell, and their schedule is absolutely brutal. In fact, I don't normally do this during these prediction videos, but just to drive the point home here about Wisconsin. So Ohio State plays Wisconsin at Wisconsin on October 16th. You can see right here. I'm going to click on Wisconsin and show you their schedule. Look at Wisconsin's October schedule. At Michigan, home against Iowa, home against Ohio State, and at Oregon in 4 consecutive weeks. Now, they will have already played at Alabama in the first month of the season. And then in the last month of the season, they play Washington. I just talked about what I think about them. At Indiana, a playoff team from last year. Illinois, who I think's could make the playoffs this year, and they finish up on the road at Minnesota, who almost beat Penn State in this exact same spot last season. This is the most ridiculous schedule I think that I've ever seen. But anyway, this is not a Wisconsin. It's just, I mean, look, I like Lou Fickell, but holy shit, man. What can anybody do against that? So in other words, it's going to be a down bad type of situation, I think, for Wisconsin. Penn State will get the win there, even though it is on the road at Camp Randall. Then you have another bye week before hosting Penn State, which will be yet another sort of game of the year for Ohio State this season. And again, I've done a Penn State version of this, so you might already know where I'm headed here. I can't pick Penn State to win the game. I think Penn State is a really good team. In fact, I think Penn State could win it all. Especially if it works out at wide receiver for them. They brought in the guy from Syracuse and a couple of others. They're loaded everywhere else. But they play Ohio State, and it's not that they don't win the game. They can't get first downs. I mean, they struggle to get to double-digit points every year against Ohio State. They rarely get blown out. You know, it seems like they're always losing 20-13 or 17-13 or whatever it is, something like that. There's no way I can pick Penn State to win on the road at Ohio State, even though I think Penn State might actually be a better team this year than Ohio State, which is not always the case. So I've got Ohio State getting a huge win here because 3 losses could be detrimental, and I've got them with 2 losses already. I think they beat Penn State here at home. Then they go on the road and play Purdue, just an afterthought of a team and a program, just an absolute abomination. They were terrible last year. Purdue was. Did they change coaches again? Probably. Then you play UCLA again. You've already played their quarterback once, hadn't you? Nico, how'd that work out? Now, Nico's got to go back to Columbus, Ohio. Shit, I know he's got PTSD from when he went up there last time. Y'all will beat the soul and will live out of UCLA. Rutgers is like Michigan and Illinois, too. They're just way less talented. I like Greg Schiano as a head coach, but they're not winning this game. It's in Ohio State. I think you'll beat Rutgers. And then the Michigan game. At Michigan. Michigan has beat you home and away. It hadn't mattered 4 years in a row. It hadn't mattered whether Ohio State was better or Michigan was better. Hadn't mattered whether they had Jim Harbaugh or didn't have Jim Harbaugh. In fact, they've beat you 2 years in a row without Jim Harbaugh. He was suspended when the game was played 2 years ago, and last year Sharon Moore, beat you. So it hasn't mattered. And now you got to go on the road and play Michigan. I mean, I just told you, there's no way I can pick Penn State to beat Ohio State because Ohio State beats Penn State every year. Well, Michigan beats Ohio State every year. I picked Georgia to lose to Bama. Yeah, I did a Georgia prediction video yesterday. I picked Georgia to lose to Bama. Why? Because Georgia always loses to Bama. And you always lose to Michigan. But not this year. Not sitting on 2 losses. Not when this is an elimination game, basically. Now, could a 9-3 Ohio State team get in? Yeah, they could. Last year, the 9-3 seemed to be like the cutoff, right? You had Illinois sitting there at 9-3, didn't get in. Alabama, Ole Miss, South Carolina, all at 9-3, didn't get in. But I do think a 9-3 team could get in, depending on what the records are everywhere else. I think Ohio State goes on the road to Michigan and wins. I at this point, I think Ohio State has a better chance of winning at Michigan than they do at home. The pressure that is on Ryan Day and Ohio State, even though they won the Natty last year to beat Michigan, is astronomical. I think the pressure is even greater when Ohio State's playing at home in front of 100,000 of their own fans, right? Now, there'll be a lot of Ohio State fans at this game in Michigan, but it's going to be, 80% Michigan fan. Anyway, this will be a shot. Ohio State, it's hard to understand what has happened here. I'm going against the grain. I'm going against my better judgment. All offseason, I've been saying there's no way I'm picking Ohio State to win at Michigan. I can't. I got to see Ohio State win first. And I'm probably going to regret this. And I'll apologize ahead of time now to all my Michigan friends on here. I'm picking Ohio State to go on the road and win in Ann Arbor. I can't believe I'm doing that. I've got Ohio State at 10-2, same record as last year. I do think 11-1 is a possibility. I don't think 12-0 is a possibility, only because I'm not predicting anybody to go 12-0. In fact, last year only, just pure luck really when you do these prediction videos, but last year only predicted one team to go 12-0, and it was Oregon. And Oregon went 12-0, and they were the only team that went 12-0. So I actually got the whole undefeated thing right last year. I'm not picking anybody to go undefeated this year. It's just with these expanded conferences. And then you look at a lot of the high-level teams, they have new quarterbacks. Ohio State, new quarterback. Bama, new quarterback. Georgia, new quarterback. Texas, new quarterback. You look at the two highly rated teams with returning quarterbacks, Clemson and Penn State, potential national champions there with experienced quarterbacks. Anyway, I've got Ohio State at 10-2. That might be good enough, by the way. That might be good enough, by the way, to probably is good enough to get into the Big Ten championship game, because one of those losses, Texas, is a non-conference loss. So the only conference loss I've got for Ohio State is that game in the middle of the year at Illinois. So that gives you one conference loss, almost guaranteed a spot to the Big Ten title game, which means you will be going to the playoffs for sure. But I've got Ohio State at 10-2. Be sure and let me know in the comments down below how stupid I am, and have a good morning.